I was 29 when my life started counting down. For months, I lived with the quiet fear that every heartbeat could be my last. My heart was failing, not metaphorically, but literally shutting down. Doctors used words like cardiomyopathy and end-stage failure, but all I heard was that I wouldn't make it past the year. I couldn't run. I couldn't work. I couldn't even walk up a flight of stairs without my chest locking up and my vision darkening at the edges. It felt like drowning inside my own body, with no way to surface. My name was suddenly on transplant lists. You'd think that would bring hope, but it didn't. People died waiting. Every night I stared at the ceiling, wondering if my name would ever be called, and if it was, what it meant for the person whose heart I'd get. That's the part they don't tell you. A transplant means hope for one person and heartbreak for another family. I tried to make peace with it, but it haunted me. Would I even feel like myself with someone else's heart beating inside my chest? Could I carry their story, their life, without ever knowing them? The questions swirled in the dark corners of my mind, the places fear likes to hide. Then the call came. It was a gray Thursday morning, the kind you forget until everything changes. I was at home, half dozing on the couch, when my phone buzzed. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. They had a heart. A perfect match. They needed me at the hospital, now. I remember packing in a fog. Sweatpants. A charger. I couldn't even think straight. My hands shook as I tried to call my parents. My mom answered and I told her the words that felt so unreal I could barely believe I was saying them. She started crying before I finished the sentence. My dad got on the line and said, "We're coming." That's when it hit me, this was happening. The hospital felt both frantic and eerily calm. Nurses moved quickly, checking vitals, running tests, talking in clipped, professional tones. My surgeon, a man with steady hands and tired eyes, came in to explain the risks. I nodded through it all. The words blurred. Heart transplant. Possible rejection. Lifetime medication. Survival rates. All I could think was, whose heart is this? But they didn't tell me that part. They never do. Privacy laws. The identity of donors is protected. You don't get to know whose heart you're getting, at least, not at first. I'd be getting a stranger's heart, and they would be gone. I was the next chapter in someone else's story. I signed the forms with a hand that didn't feel like mine. Then they wheeled me into pre-op. The lights overhead blurred as we moved down the hallway. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them like a child trying to stay calm before a storm. The last thing I remember before going under was the anesthesiologist's voice, soft and reassuring. And then nothing. When I woke up, it felt like being hit by a truck. Everything hurt. My chest felt like it had been cracked open, because it had. But beneath the pain, there was something else. A rhythm. A strong, steady beat I hadn't felt in years. Not my heart, but his. The heart that once belonged to another man, now keeping me alive. It's a strange feeling, knowing your life continues because someone else's ended. You carry the weight of that reality. Days passed in a blur of medication schedules, physical therapy, and doctors' briefings. I was alive. That was the headline. But underneath that, I felt hollow. Like I'd gained a heartbeat but lost something I couldn't name. People visited, friends from work, old classmates, even neighbors I barely knew before. They came with flowers, cards, awkward words of encouragement. It was all kind and polite. But none of it reached me. I was grateful, sure, grateful to be alive, grateful they cared. But it felt like I was a spectator in my own life, smiling from a distance at scenes I couldn't connect with. Then, one afternoon, a woman showed up at my hospital room door. She wasn't carrying flowers. She wasn't holding a get-well card. She just stood there, hands clasped in front of her, looking uncertain. Her eyes locked on mine, and something in her expression, I don't even know how to explain it, hit me harder than any words ever could. She introduced herself quietly. Her name. Simple. Soft. I repeated it back, not even sure why. Then she said it. She was the wife of my heart donor. The man whose heart was beating inside my chest. The man I owed my life to. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone who's lost everything, while you're sitting there alive because of that very loss? My mouth went dry. She must have noticed, because she gave me the faintest smile. Not pity. Not sympathy. Something else entirely. Understanding, maybe. She explained how she'd asked the hospital if she could meet me. How she wanted to know the person who was living on with part of her husband. I don't know why, but I thought she'd come with anger, or resentment, or maybe just curiosity. But it wasn't like that at all. She wasn't there for closure. She wasn't there for answers. She just wanted to meet me. We talked for a while. About nothing, really. About the weather. About hospital food. About how neither of us liked the bland colors of the room. But underneath all that small talk, there was this quiet current running between us. An unspoken connection that neither of us could put into words. I remember how she looked at me, not like I was a stranger, but not like I was her husband, either. It was somewhere in between. Like I was a living reminder of both love and loss, tangled together in a way neither of us expected. As the days went on, she came back. Not every day. Not even predictably. Sometimes she'd show up and just sit with me, reading a book in the chair by the window. Sometimes we'd talk about random things, music, food, even old movies. Other times we didn't talk at all. It wasn't forced. It wasn't awkward. It just was. The nurses noticed. They asked if she was family. I said no. They nodded but gave me that knowing look. I didn't correct them. I didn't really know how to explain it myself. Her visits became this quiet thread in my recovery, something I didn't look for but felt comforted by when it happened. There was a calmness about her, a softness in her voice that made the sterile walls of the hospital seem a little less harsh. She didn't come with expectations. She didn't ask for gratitude or apologies. I thought we'd only meet once or twice. That it would be one of those quiet, respectful encounters people have when life throws them into impossible situations. She had every right to come see me, the man who now carried a part of her late husband inside him, and I had every reason to accept her visit with grace and nothing more. But it didn't end there. Our paths kept crossing, sometimes by chance, sometimes because one of us made a subtle choice to make it happen. The hospital became our strange middle ground. It was where I was healing and where she had first come to grieve. She knew the halls, the staff, even some of the doctors. Her husband had spent his final days here. I learned later that she often visited the ICU, not because she had anyone left there, but because she said it helped her feel close to him. Somehow, that habit shifted, and instead of wandering the halls alone, she started stopping by my room. Our conversations changed too. At first, it was simple things, asking how I felt, if I was strong enough to sit up, how the food was. Then she started bringing me things. A book she thought I might like. A crossword puzzle. One day, a small plant in a chipped pot. She said something about how it might make the room feel less like a hospital. I didn't know how to react to that. It was a simple gesture, but it hit me harder than it should have. Slowly, I realized I was looking forward to seeing her. I didn't notice it at first. It was subtle. The way I'd glance at the door when footsteps passed by. The way my heart, the heart that once belonged to her husband, seemed to beat a little quicker when she walked in. I told myself it was gratitude. A natural response to the woman whose loss had given me life. But the more time we spent together, the harder it became to believe that. She opened up too. Not all at once, but in little pieces. She talked about her husband, not in grand, emotional stories, but in tiny details that painted a picture of a man I would never meet. His love for old jazz records. How he used to make her tea every night, even if he was dead tired. The way he left the porch light on whenever she came home late. Those stories stayed with me long after she left the room. They settled somewhere deep, next to the heartbeat that didn't used to be mine. We started sharing things we probably shouldn't have. I told her about my fears before the transplant, about how I felt like I didn't know who I was anymore. She listened without interrupting, without offering the kind of empty comfort most people throw at you in moments like that. She just listened, and somehow, that was enough. There were moments I caught myself watching her too closely. The way her hands moved when she talked. The soft laugh she had when I said something dumb. The faint trace of sadness in her eyes that never seemed to fully go away. I noticed everything, and I hated myself for it. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't some romantic movie plot. It was real, messy, complicated. And yet, there I was, feeling something I couldn't explain and definitely couldn't admit. I convinced myself it was all in my head. That the connection I felt was one-sided, born from gratitude, survivor's guilt, and too many long hospital nights. But there were times, brief flickers of moments, when I'd catch her looking at me with that same complicated expression. Not pity. Not just kindness. Something else. I tried to keep my feelings in check. I reminded myself over and over that I was alive because her husband wasn't. That every beat of this heart inside me came with a debt I could never repay. I convinced myself that what I felt for her wasn't real, just a strange mix of gratitude and misplaced emotion stirred up by the trauma of everything we'd both been through. But no matter how many times I told myself that, it didn't stop the feelings from growing. Every visit from her felt both comforting and complicated. We could sit for hours talking about meaningless things, a show on TV, a news story, something one of the nurses said, but under all that small talk was this heavy, invisible thread tying us together. I caught myself looking forward to the sound of her footsteps outside my door, the soft knock before she entered. I noticed when her hair was tied back differently, or when she wore a color I hadn't seen on her before. It was like some quiet part of me woke up every time she walked into the room. But with every small moment of connection came a wave of guilt I couldn't shake. How could I even think about feeling this way? She was grieving. She had buried her husband. And me? I was alive because of him. It felt wrong. Like I was stealing something that wasn't mine to even want. I would lie awake at night, staring at the hospital ceiling, replaying our conversations in my head, searching for signs that I'd crossed a line or misread something she said. She never gave me a reason to think she felt anything more than kindness toward me. But at the same time, she never acted like a woman keeping her distance from a man she should only see as a living reminder of her husband. It was confusing. Some days, she sat closer to me than I expected. Other times, she lingered a little longer before leaving, her hand brushing mine in ways that felt too natural to be accidents. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was just desperate for connection after months of fear and isolation. But deep down, I knew that wasn't entirely true. There were moments when we talked that felt too raw, too personal. Like when I opened up about how afraid I was of the future, afraid I'd never feel normal again with this heart inside me. She didn't shy away from that. She met my fear with her own stories of loneliness, of waking up and reaching for someone who wasn't there. It wasn't just small talk anymore. It wasn't just comfort. It started to feel like something neither of us could easily explain. I hated myself for wanting more. For letting my mind drift to places it had no business going. I felt like I was betraying the man whose heart I carried, even though I'd never known him. It was as if this heart came with some invisible vow I couldn't break, a vow to honor him, to protect the memory of who he was. And here I was, sitting in a hospital room, wishing for something I had no right to wish for. The worst part was that I didn't know how to stop it. The more I tried to push the feelings away, the stronger they came back. It was like trying to hold back the tide with nothing but my bare hands. And every time I thought I had built up enough distance, one look, one smile from her would tear it all down again. I questioned everything. Was this just grief twisting itself into something else? Was I a replacement in her eyes? Or was I reading my own guilt and need into something that wasn't really there? The battle inside me grew stronger with every passing day. On one side was the raw, undeniable connection I felt with her, something I couldn't explain and definitely couldn't ignore. On the other was the silent promise I felt I owed to the man whose heart now beat inside my chest. I hadn't known him. I didn't even know his name at first. But he had been her husband, her partner, her love. And now, a piece of him was keeping me alive. That fact sat between us every time we spoke, even when neither of us said it out loud. I started asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Was I honoring his memory by being there for her, listening when she needed someone? Or was I betraying him by letting myself care for her in ways I shouldn't? Was it wrong to feel drawn to her, or was it something I couldn't help, a strange twist of fate that had nothing to do with right or wrong? I turned these questions over in my head, over and over, like trying to solve a puzzle that didn't want to be solved. There were moments when I thought about stepping away completely. Walking away before anything could happen, before I crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I imagined telling her that I needed space, that I appreciated everything she'd done for me, but I couldn't keep seeing her. I rehearsed the words in my head a dozen times. But every time I pictured saying them, I couldn't follow through. Because the truth was, I didn't want to lose her. It felt like I was caught between two powerful forces, the weight of gratitude and the pull of something deeper I didn't dare name. Gratitude was what brought us together, sure. But the pull I felt toward her wasn't just that. It wasn't some misplaced thankfulness or a need to repay a debt. It was something entirely different, something I hadn't felt in years, maybe not ever. At the same time, I wrestled with the thought of how it must look from the outside. I imagined people judging us, assuming the worst. I pictured whispers about how the heart recipient had somehow stolen the widow's affections, like some cruel, twisted betrayal. That thought sickened me. I never wanted her to be the subject of gossip or pity or judgment. And I didn't want to be the man who let feelings blind him to the pain she must still be carrying. But the lines between honoring him and following my heart started to blur in ways I hadn't expected. I realized I wasn't the only one caught in this impossible tangle. She was too. There were times I caught her staring at me when she thought I wasn't looking, a long, searching glance that said more than words ever could. And in those moments, I knew I wasn't alone in this struggle. The connection we shared wasn't simple. It wasn't clean or easy. It was wrapped in layers of grief, guilt, hope, and something like love that neither of us wanted to name yet. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast and uncertain, knowing that one wrong step could mean hurting the very person I wanted to protect. I started thinking about him more. The man who had loved her first, who had built a life with her, who had shared moments with her I'd never know. I wondered what he would think of me now. Would he hate me for feeling this way about his wife? Would he see me as a thief of his place in her heart? Or would he somehow understand that life doesn't always follow the rules we expect it to? Those questions haunted me more than I liked to admit. They shaped every word I said to her, every moment I spent with her. I didn't want to hurt her, but I also didn't want to lie, not to her, and not to myself. I kept thinking there would be a moment when everything would make sense. A moment when the weight of loss, gratitude, and emotion would settle into something clear and understandable. But it never came. What did come was a slow, shifting realization that life after a transplant wasn't about tying up every loose end or fitting emotions into neat little boxes. It was about living in the space between what was and what could be, and learning to accept that some feelings come with no clear answers. As the weeks passed and my body grew stronger, I found myself moving past the hospital walls and stepping back into the world I'd almost left behind. The city felt different. The air felt different. Even the rhythm of my own heartbeat felt different. I couldn't tell if that was because of the surgery or everything that had happened since. All I knew was that I didn't look at life the same way anymore. She didn't disappear when I left the hospital. If anything, our connection deepened in ways I hadn't expected. She started visiting me at home. Sometimes with food, sometimes with nothing but her company. We'd sit on my porch and talk for hours, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops, falling into conversations that ran deeper than before. It wasn't about gratitude anymore. It wasn't about obligation. It wasn't even about loss. It was just us. I wondered if she felt the same shift I did. If she, too, had started to see me as more than just the man with her husband's heart. The lines we'd been so careful not to cross had started to blur so gently that neither of us seemed to notice when it happened. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic confessions. Just moments, simple, quiet moments, where the air between us felt charged with something more than friendship or shared grief. I started to understand that the heart inside me wasn't just a symbol of loss. It was a bridge between two lives, his and mine. And maybe even hers. It wasn't about replacing him. It wasn't about forgetting him. It was about accepting that love can change, evolve, and sometimes grow in the shadow of heartbreak. Love doesn't erase the past. It doesn't cancel grief. It finds a way to live alongside them. There were still moments when guilt would creep in. When I'd question if this was fair to him, to her, or even to myself. But those moments became less sharp over time. They softened as I realized that this wasn't some betrayal or mistake. It wasn't about stepping into someone else's life or stealing something that wasn't mine. It was about two people trying to make sense of the pieces they'd been left holding after life had torn everything apart. One evening, as we sat together, she told me about how she used to feel like a part of her had died with him. How she thought she'd never feel connected to anyone again. She said it without expecting anything from me, almost like a thought slipping out in the quiet. I didn't know what to say at first. I just listened, and somewhere in that silence, I realized that maybe, in some strange way, we were helping each other heal. The heart in my chest didn't belong to just one person anymore. It carried his memory, yes, but it also carried my life and hers too. It beat for all of us, for the love she'd lost, the life I'd nearly lost, and the unexpected bond we'd found in the middle of it all. I stopped thinking in terms of right or wrong, of who should or shouldn't feel what. I started to believe that maybe, sometimes, life gives you a second chance not just to live but to love differently. Not as a replacement. Not as a rescue. But as something new born from everything that came before.